Hi and welcome to this video about heart functions. Today we're going to be looking at how the heart rate is controlled and about cardiovascular drift. And so you have two major systems, one that speeds up your heart rate, another which slows it down. The one which slows it down is referred to as the parasympathetic, and this effectively will reduce your heart rate, and the sympathetic will increase it. And so you have sections within your brain that actually control this, and these are found in an area called the medulla, and so you have a parasympathetic and a sympathetic centre within that section of the brain. Now, specifically how this works, how the heart rate can be controlled, there are a number of different factors that can actually influence this. So one of them is the pressure receptors that you find within the blood vessels. Also, measuring temperature within the muscles can also determine your heart rate, and also the stretch receptors in the muscles can also have an influence. But one of the main areas that we need to look at for the course is the role of chemo receptors that are basically found in the blood. So chemo receptors essentially measure changes within the chemistry of the blood, and so they're specifically looking at the concentration of CO2. So obviously if you're having to work quite hard, your cells are having to respire more, you'd expect more CO2. And so what would happen there, when you're exercising hard, you produce more carbon dioxide, and therefore that is picked up by the chemoreceptors found within the blood. That then will send a message to the cardiovascular centre in the brain, specifically in this case, the sympathetic centre, because obviously if you're exercising hard, you're going to need to get more blood to those areas, and so therefore it needs to speed up, and that sends a message down the sympathetic nerve to the SA node, telling the heart to speed up. Obviously, if you have a very low level of CO2, so this might be at rest or this might be when you're sleeping, basically the same rules apply here. That's picked up again by chemoreceptors found within the blood, and because the low level of CO2 would indicate you're not having to, you don't need a huge amount of respiration going on, therefore the heart rate can slow down. So that sends the message to the cardiovascular centre in the brain, specifically the parasympathetic. That then sends a message down the parasympathetic nerve to the SA node, telling it to slow down. And this effectively is how your heart rate is controlled. It's all to do with the level of carbon dioxide found within the blood. Now, the final section that we have to cover in this topic is to do with cardiovascular drift. And what cardiovascular drift is, or occurs when you're doing long bouts of exercise, usually for over 10 to 15 minutes. You have to be doing aerobic exercise for this to occur. And you can see on this graph, this illustrates what happens in cardiovascular drift. What happens is, after a prolonged period of exercise, so usually 15 to 20 minutes, you can see the stroke volume has gone down. And so in order to basically maintain the cardiac output, what therefore needs to happen is your pulse rate, your heart rate, needs to increase. And so you can see on the graph here, on the dotted line, that the pulse rate has had to go up in order to negate the problem of a reducing stroke volume. And so what happens to the cardiac output is it remained reasonably stable. Obviously, if the stroke volume drops and the pulse rate doesn't increase, you therefore wouldn't get enough blood to the cells that need it, that are respiring, and therefore there'd be knock-on effects to that. But cardiovascular drift is when the stroke volume drops after prolonged exercise, and therefore your heart rate has to increase in order to make that shortfall up.